Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Sports Talk with Austin, your daily dose of sports and entertainment. Today on the show, it is season in review time once again, and it's time to do the Michigan Wolverines. And what a spectacular season they had. They finished on top of the mountain, on top of the world, and they won the Big Ten on all of it through all the heartbreak and suffering that they had to deal with due to the entire NCAA, but they finished on top, and that's all that matters. But you don't want to hear me just talk about it. Oh, no, no, no. I had to bring in an expert Wolverine to help me out. And what better Wolverine I could think of than the host of the Ocho on the Voice of College Football, Mr. John D. Adamo, as he will be here today to help talk about Michigan's season, talk about what it's like to be champions, and give out some hardware, offensive and defensive MVPs. But, John, how are you doing? And how's it hanging over there in Michigan land?
Yeah, Austin, it feels good to be the champion, I gotta say. Definitely feels good. And, so go blue to all Wolverine country, anybody who's watching.
Yeah, I'm happy for y'all, John. It's been a long journey there. I'm happy Harbaugh finally found some success, and now he's off to the NFL, which we'll talk about that, I'm sure, as we go through tonight. But let's take it back to the beginning. Where the origins. Before the season started, every team kind of has a narrative about them, whether you're a good, bad, ugly team, whichever team. But what are some 2 or 3 key narratives that maybe was with Michigan, because they had beaten Ohio State, won the Big Ten, and those narratives were kind of fading away. What were some narratives that they came up with now to move the goalpost on you, so to speak?
Yeah, so before the season, I think some of the key narratives were that Jim Harbaugh couldn't win a big game, couldn't win a postseason game. He hadn't won a postseason game since 2015 against Florida in his first year. So there were a lot of narratives about that. NFL speculation was happening even then about, is Jim Harbaugh going to stick around much longer? So there was a lot there. Obviously, you mentioned NCAA stuff. Of course, even back then there were still, that's when there was Burgergate. So we hadn't heard about Connor Stallions yet, but we heard about, God forbid we pay for a recruit to have a cheeseburger, and God forbid we watch Zoom practices, despite the fact that half, the pretty much the entire NFL watched Zoom practices, and. Yeah, I just don't see why during the COVID year that we were enforcing that when we were trying to enforce people social distancing and trying to, save people's lives, that we're going to scrutinize when someone did take precautions and do things a safe way. Oh yeah, you're going to get penalized for that. It made no sense to me. And but anyway, so there was definitely an undercurrent of, Michigan had this great returning production, 78% returning production. But, there was that stigma, can't win the big game, can't beat the SEC, can't win a playoff game. And so, there were those who said it was a 1% chance to win the national championship. There were so many naysayers, and, Michigan went ahead and went through their schedule and is one of the only undefeated teams in the modern era. So, pretty good.
Yeah, and to comment off that, it's very interesting that you talk about Burgergate. For the longest time, that just was like the biggest thing going at Michigan. Like, oh, should Jim Harbaugh get this or that? And then all of a sudden, like you said, the Connor Stallion stuff. And it just seemed like it was one thing after another going into the year. But as we come to find out and get ready to talk about, Michigan had a pretty darn good year, I might even add. And they went 15-0, 9-0 overall, and
Yeah.
they won the Big Ten yet again,
Yep.
3 straight years in a row. What a great accomplishment! And we
Yeah.
have the schedule here pulled up to talk about it. But John, just let me ask you. Obviously Harbaugh missed, I believe, the first 4 games of the year. Correct?
Hmm. So he missed, I believe it was the first 3, and then he was back for Rutgers, if I recall.
Now,
So
did that
he missed a grand total, I believe, of 6 games for the season.
And as you see, as we see here, the non-conference is not that tough. I mean,
No.
UNLV, Bowling Green, and East Carolina.
Yeah.
Michigan can handle that. But
Yeah,
how do
it was interesting how the approach of that they used was Michigan for these first 3, Michigan self-imposed a suspension of 3 games for Jim Harbaugh and a suspension of 1 game for Sharon Moore. And so the East Carolina Pirates, it was Kirk Campbell, who was the quarterback's coach, was the OC and play caller. And so, yeah, we got to see a different look at the offense. And then, they rotated between, I think it was Jesse Minner and Mike Hart and Jay Harbaugh. And then finally in the 3rd game, Bowling Green, that's when Sharon Moore had his first game as interim head coach. And it was a harbinger of things to come. So basically, the goal in those 3 games was keep the train on the tracks. And that's what they did in those first 3 games. They kept the train on the tracks so that Harbaugh, when he came back, would be in a good position. And then they really did rip through these 5 teams pretty easily. Rutgers gave a bit of a fight defensively. Credit to Shiano for coaching a really tough team that wound up winning going 7-6 and winning, I believe, was the Pinstripe Bowl. That's their best season in ages.
and they beat
So
Miami? They beat Miami to do it, which Miami's always back, as Hurricanes fans like to proclaim. But a great season by Rutgers, and it turned out being a great win for Michigan in the end.
Yep. And then you just keep looking here. They just rip through the schedule, and then we get to Michigan State, and that is when everything went down. So before that game, it was announced that the Connor Stallions Spygate, where for those of you unfamiliar, Connor Stallions was on Michigan's staff. He had kind of risen the ranks from a volunteer to an analyst who, his job essentially was to monitor signs. And every team has, one or 2 or 3 people to monitor signs. Now, he decided to go a little bit above and beyond and hire some of his friends to take their iPhones and go take some game footage. Technically, not in. If you look at the NCAA bylaws, technically, the section that everybody's talking about was written for full-time staff scouting. So hiring buddies is not full-time staff. So by the letter of the law, he didn't break the law of the NCAA. So, we have had this whole thing for months and months and months, and it's really turned out to be so far pretty much a nothing burger to give that logic. But, look, was it cheating? Yes, it was. Was it a response to others cheating? Also, yes. And the others aren't getting penalized, and Michigan is. And I think it comes down to fairness. But the Michigan State game was the first game that Connor Stallions was not on staff. And Michigan State did huddle and check with me. There were no signals. It was huddle and check with me, which counteracts any advantage Michigan would have gotten with Connor Stallions and the signals. And Michigan won 49-0. And that should have been the first statement that this whole thing was BS because of that. But if you need more proof that it was BS, well, why don't you look at the rest of the schedule, and you can be the judge on if this was because of Connor Stallions or because Michigan had a better team than everybody else that they played by far in a lot of these cases. Purdue was the most passing we saw from JJ. He did suffer an injury, and at Penn State, he was limited. They actually ran the ball the entire second half. This was the first game that Sharon Moore was interim head coach because Tony Petitti in the Big Ten imposed additional penalties while they were flying to Penn State, which I thought was a very cowardly move, if I'm being honest. They announced while they were in air that Jim Harbaugh was going to be suspended for the rest of the regular season. He could still coach Monday through Friday, but he can't be the in-game coach on Saturdays. So Sharon Moore goes, he gets thrown into interim head coach, and he has to take 3 roles, Austin, for the next 3 games. He has to be the head coach of the program. He has to be the offensive coordinator and play caller of the program, and he has to be the offensive line coach in the program. So he had the hardest position group to coach. He had the hardest job in college football, which is the offensive coordinator and play caller, and he had to oversee the decisions at the high level, whether to go for it on 4th down. Are you kicking it? Are you punting it? If you're 4th and 1, do you ram it in? Do you punt? I mean, these are the types of things that he had to think about. He had an extraordinarily tough job, and he was still able to beat the 3 toughest opponents late. I would argue Penn State, Maryland, and Ohio State were our toughest in-season opponents by far, and we had an interim head coach. So the fact that Michigan was able to go into Penn State and beat them, go to College Park and survive a hangover and a trap game, and then Ohio State finding a way to win with an injured quarterback, finding a way to win a game that Ryan Day had so much pressure to win. He had pressure from his fan base. He had pressure from everybody. He had pressure, I believe, from the Big Ten and from the NCAA. Whether it was implicit pressure or explicit pressure, I believe there was a little bit of like, hey, you better win this game after all that, we've been penalizing Michigan and everything else. You better win this game and beat Michigan. Well, they didn't. And so Tony Petitti had to deal with watching Michigan pummel Iowa in Lucas Oil and beating Iowa 26-0. Okay. And then we had, obviously, the best games late, the final games. This is where Michigan broke the ceiling. This is where Michigan proved that they were elite because they had to go to the Rose Bowl and beat the greatest college football coach of all time. And they were able to do enough especially on defense. That defense was excellent in that game. They were beating Alabama in the trenches. I mean, that was remarkable. Almost no one except Clemson beats Alabama in the trenches.
So, John, I want to talk about those games up above real quick, and then I have a question I would like you to answer about Alabama, and we can put those to bed.
Sure.
Because there's a certain thing going around about how, we'll get to it about how y'all didn't want to play Alabama. But, the Penn State game, you mentioned that, John, Sharon Moore's first game. Mm-hmm. You look at it, they went to Happy Valley and they won the game running the ball. They
Yeah.
did not pass in the second half, I do not believe.
No,
And
well, they had two design passes, one that got called back, and one that JJ chose to run. So they had two like pass concepts or RPOs, but because of what happened, it turned out to be all runs.
and that just goes to show the testament of this team. I noticed watching that game too, John, that team had a lot of heart, and it was in Penn State. A lot of people make fun of James Franklin. Ha ha, he can't win the big games. Penn State this, Penn State that. Penn State is a tough team to beat at home, and the fact that Michigan did it with their backs against the wall, and they did it without Jim Harbaugh, their leader, their heart and soul of the team, you can almost say, and they
Yeah.
and they did it the way they did, proved that Michigan, it was legit, and like you said, proved everything wrong about everything that everybody ever said about Michigan. Like you said with Maryland, kind of a trap game esque. Week 4 Ohio State, it happens, and then Ohio State, the biggest game of the year. A lot of people say it's the greatest rivalry that there ever is in college
Yeah.
sports, and you all won that game, and y'all won it fair and square, and you did it without Jim Harbaugh yet again. And it just goes to show every time you throw something in Michigan's path, they keep overcoming it. And then, of course, the Iowa game, a lot of people were making fun of Michigan because they're like, oh, you only beat Iowa by 26. And you've mentioned, John, on your show, The Ocho, great show, by the way. Go check it out on Monday nights at 8 p.m. Check it out if you love the great content on the Voice of College Football. But it was very vanilla play calling, if I ain't ever seen any of it. And John, maybe you could speak to that a little bit more if you want, but it was just very vanilla play calling. They didn't want to give whoever they were going to play anything to look at beyond just run the ball and just get out of there. Because let's be honest,
You're right.
Iowa's a great team, but they're not. They weren't a threat to Michigan. Go ahead, though, John.
No, and we had said that going into that game that Michigan was going to win significantly. There were some Iowa fans who said that was disrespectful, but I just think if you looked at both teams and the fact that one of them really doesn't have much of an offense, then it kind of sets up for a curb stomp, which is what happened. When you mentioned vanilla play calling, I agree with you. And I think that the motto of Michigan was just to get the win. It didn't matter if it was pretty. Michigan's goal wasn't to win pretty. Michigan's goal was to win by 1 point, however, whatever it takes to do that. So if that meant running 32 offensive plays in the second half against Penn State, then that's what it means. They're going to line up 8 linemen and a quarterback and Blake Corum, and they're going to pound the rock, and they're going to, and they're going to go for 227 yards on the ground. Then that's what that means. When they played Maryland, just escape that game. Mostly on defense, on the back of the fact that Talia can be a little interception happy. He's an exceptional quarterback, but he's also prone to throw picks. Kind of reminds me of Brett Favre a little bit in that aspect. And then you've got obviously Ohio State. Michigan found a way to win on defense. So Buckeye fans. Is Connor Stallions responsible for Kyle McCord throwing the ball to Rod Moore? I'm just curious because that's what it sounds like people are saying, but pretty sure that Connor Stallions didn't make Ohio State's quarterback throw to the Michigan player. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think that was just pure talent, and plus the defensive line was able to get home. If you watch the play, they were able to hit McCord just enough where he let that thing wobbly, and Michigan was able to get to it. Great play by the Wolverines. I don't think Mr. Stallion had anything to do with that, and thus it set Michigan up to be the number 1 seed. But John, I want you to clear the air on this because this has been something I've been wanting to ask you for a while. So we all know Florida State, they had their quarterback debacle and all that going on, right?
Yeah.
And then come to find out, Alabama gets the 4 seed. And then we see a video of Michigan groaning and saying, ugh. And people put out there that, oh, Michigan, are you scared of Alabama? Well, are you afraid to play Nick Saban? Is Jim Harbaugh know this is the end for him? Just clear that up, John.
Yeah.
Clear it up.
It's one of the silliest things I had ever heard, and I have listened to a lot of silly takes in football, and that might have been one of the silliest I've ever heard for a couple of reasons. One, no one was scared to play Alabama. The reaction that some of the players had was the natural reaction that we all had to an undefeated program being left out of the playoffs for the first time. Like an undefeated Power 5 major program got left out. That has never happened in the history of the college football playoff. So with that said, that's why they had that reaction. I'm sure you had a similar reaction, and I had a similar reaction of shock that they actually did it. They actually put in Alabama over a 13-0 team. So that's part one, is that the reaction was just the natural shock of what happened. They weren't scared. Number two, how could they possibly be scared when our drills that we did were called Beat Georgia? The whole goal of the year was to beat Georgia, who I still believe is the better team, even though Alabama beat them. I still believe Georgia's the probably overall top to bottom on any given Saturday. Probably would have beat Alabama, but the game happened the way that it did. Alabama beat Georgia, which means that we've been training to beat a major SEC program since the offseason. So to say that Michigan was scared, if anything, at least I can speak for myself, I was excited. I was excited for the matchup of Michigan versus Alabama in the Rose Bowl. I thought that was exciting, and it gave Michigan a chance that if we had played FSU, we wouldn't have had that same level of just, holy crap, Michigan has finally turned the corner, or taken it up a gear, because Michigan finally beat the best SEC program in the country according to the SEC championship. Mm-hmm. And Michigan beat them in the Rose Bowl. Like, that was a major moment for the program, and I guess we'll get to the Natty, but yeah, I would say that was really just very, very silly.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, John. People saying that, I think a lot of it was from Buckeyes fans and people who just didn't really want to see Michigan succeed. Was probably a big part of it. But I will have to say, though, John, I agree with you on your take about the Florida State. If Michigan beats Florida State, it would have just been, oh, good job, Michigan. You beat them without Jordan Travis. We could have done that.
Right.
And I'm glad y'all got the opportunity against Alabama, because it showed that, hey, we can play with the big boys. We're here. We're legit. And, there was a key play in overtime that really, really showed to me who won it more. And that was that Blake Corum game-ending touchdown.
Yep.
When he just kept breaking tackles left and right. And I said to myself right there as I was watching, I was like, Michigan wants this more. Bama's exhausted.
Yeah. The Tyler Morris play earlier, where he was just outrunning the SEC speed of Alabama. Just the outmanning in the trenches that Michigan was doing at multiple points in the game. And that fourth quarter comeback to take it to overtime. I can't emphasize this enough. Most quarterbacks that Michigan have had would have lost the game. Let me be very clear. Michigan was on the ropes. Okay? Michigan was on, and Michigan hadn't been on the ropes pretty much the entire season. You can argue against Maryland. There were some question marks. Against Ohio State, I think we all had a bit of a worry when, McCord was marching down the field close to the end of the game with with Marvin Harrison Jr. that, oh crap, Ohio State's going to win 31-30, aren't they? Because, we know what Marvin Harrison Jr. can do. And even though McCord isn't that good, you have an all-time wide receiver. So that was worrying. But again, Michigan made that play. And then, go the Alabama fourth quarter. Man, JJ, one-handed grab of that one ball to toss it to Roman Wilson. Incredibly athletic play there. The Blake Corum runs, absolutely. There were a couple of tosses to Roman and to Colston Loveland that were good, and they just found a way to put together a drive when Alabama was doing a great job shutting them down in the third quarter. So to come back and answer in that way, and then to go to overtime and like just make that statement, that dagger of like, yeah, we're gonna march down and we're gonna score, and now you're gonna have to answer and face our defense second. And then they obviously weren't able to answer. So it was just remarkable, and it showed that this team was in a league of its own.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, John. And it was very interesting, to put a bow on this. It was like Jalen Milroe, he was doing something that I didn't see a lot of defenses do against that Michigan defense. I mean, he was just running. Offenses, excuse me, not defenses. He was running all over them. And I'm like, watching this, I'm like, this is Michigan, right? They play in the Big Ten, correct? I'm like, they did all this great stuff, but they can't stop a running quarterback like that. And he was just running it up the middle every time, like basically daring Michigan, like, stop us, please, stop me. And then eventually that fourth and goal play, and he ran it up the middle, and Michigan was like, okay, you did this one too many times. We know what you're doing now. Yeah. And it backfired.
Yeah. So I think that fourth quarter and that overtime really showed what this team was made of, and that they were not going to stop until they won the national championship. And all due respect to Washington, I felt, and I think a lot of fans felt, and even people who aren't fans, but they were more casual watchers, that once Michigan did that against Alabama, it didn't really matter who they were playing against after. They were going to steamroll them. And whether it was Washington or Texas, I think it was another example of how, like, the semifinal was really the national championship game, because the game against Washington, that was, did Washington keep it close for a while? Yes, but I mean, you could tell that they were completely outmatched.
Yeah, and there was a lot of questions too. A lot of people were saying, well, Michigan hadn't played a dynamic offense like Washington, who has possibly 3 NFL wide receivers and possibly a first-round quarterback. Can Michigan handle this? And they did more than handle it. They took them to school, I have to say. Washington has not been manhandled like that all year long. You stop Dylan Johnson. Penix got hit a lot. He was not comfy in that pocket. Polk and McMillan, those guys could not get open. Michigan was just suffocating. And then the 2 big runs for Donovan Edwards. It's like, where were you all year, Mr. Edwards? I mean, glad that you decided to show up at the biggest game of the year, but where were you all this time? Yeah. It just seemed like everyone was showing up at the right time.
Yeah, I think I had it a little closer. I think I was like 34-23. But yeah, I felt that a couple of things were just not in Washington's favor. Number one, I thought it was comical that there were actual people saying that Rome Odunze was better than Marvin Harrison Jr. That's laughable. Number one, yes, they did have, to their credit, a great quarterback and great wide receivers. But you know what you also need if you're going to win a game is you need a running game, and you need a defense. And the problem with Washington that they ran into is that their defense was ranked something like 94th in the country. That's one problem. And so, they also, as we know, their running back was injured. So he was coming into the game at about half, 50%. So Michigan, that when you take away when you take away the run game and you allow Jesse Minter to only have to worry about the pass because the 4D linemen are good enough to stop the run as is, and then you just have to scheme against the pass all game, like you're giving Jesse Minter a golden ticket because he's going to beat you every time. I don't care if you have the Kansas City Chiefs. If you have the Kansas City Chiefs and you don't have a run game, Minter's going to beat you. Okay, assuming Minter has NFL players too. Obviously, but that's what I'm saying. Like, Minter was able to scheme against just the pass and focus on counteracting Penix. And with the exception of one touchdown drive, he succeeded. He mostly shut Penix down. The stats were really mediocre for him. And on the other side, you had, the Michigan Wolverines, who were a pretty complete team. Donovan Edwards was able to, you saw that even Texas was able to run the ball at will on Washington. So when I saw that Texas was just running the ball at will, I thought, okay, Michigan's going to run all over this team. And as long as they contain Penix enough, Michigan's going to win by at least a touchdown and probably a lot more. And that's what happened. So the misconceptions coming in. I, of course, went on a bunch of shows, and I had my own emergency show. And I said, and I had tonsillitis at the time, so that was fun. And so I was sucking on cough drops and tea, and I was talking with Tony Altimore on my emergency show right before the national championship game, and we were just going through it. And both of us, even though Tony, was repping the Pac-12 side, we both predicted Michigan, and I think Tony predicted a closer game, but I think it was pretty clear that Michigan was going to win, and Michigan won by a lot more than even I predicted. So.
Yeah, and I'll be the first to admit, John, I predicted Washington to win 29-26. That was my prediction.
That's right. I do remember this. Yes.
And I made mention, I was very skeptical of the back end. I was like, other than Will Johnston, I don't know if I trust these other guys. But I saw as the game went on, I was like, that was a bad pick. I was like, once I realized Dylan Johnson couldn't run the ball and help Penix down, I was like, yeah, Michigan's got this. This is going to be a problem. And all credit to you, John. Congratulations, Wolverine Nation. Y'all deserve it. Y'all earn it. And it actually segues nice into what I want to ask John next in all Wolverine Nation. How does it feel to be champions? Because now you're the champions. You're the hunted. You're no longer the hunter anymore, John. You're being hunted now. The whole college football world's coming for you next year.
Yep.
But how does it feel right now to be a champion?
I'm not going to lie to you, Austin. It feels pretty great. I have had a pretty solid couple of months, and personally, it just you have a little extra spring in your step. You know that you're national champion, and that's it's a great feeling because I wasn't sure I was going to experience it in my lifetime, and I was in kindergarten when the first one when the '97 one happened, so I was like, I get to experience Natty in my lifetime, and I got to see most of this team when I watched in person the Illinois game last year, a year back. So I got to see most of this team, which was nice. But yeah, so it was a great feeling, and what's it feel like being the hunter instead of the hunted? Like if you listen to the narrative It's like we didn't win the national championship at all, actually. It feels like we're not the hunter at all. Because if you listen to the media, it sounds like Michigan yet again has no chance to do anything. And while Michigan does have some things to figure out, like quarterback, obviously, with JJ going, a lot of offensive pieces needing to be replaced. And then, of course, the entire defensive staff went to the NFL. So Wink Martindale, who had been the DC at the Ravens and the Giants, took over as defensive coordinator. I think that was an amazing hire. I don't think you can get a better hire. He was the sensei of the other two, right? He's the sensei of McDonald and Minner. How you can't do better than that. Like, you literally, if you want to maintain the system you have, you literally can't do better than that. So, so I think it was a great hire, and apparently the recruits are very happy with the defensive staff, from what we've heard so far. So I believe Michigan is yet again in the driver's seat, and I think a 10-2 season. Michigan has a lot tougher season coming up. Texas in the second game, and a lot of tough matchups. But if Michigan can go 10-2 through those matchups, I think it's pretty safe to assume they're in the 12-team playoff, and then it's anybody's game.
And I'm happy for all Wolverines Nation. Y'all deserve it. Y'all earned it. But it's real quick. It's funny, John, how this narrative is turned on y'all now. You went from being so loved, like, can y'all just please beat Ohio State once? And now all of a sudden Michigan is like the villain. They're like, you're bad, Michigan. They don't like you anymore. Isn't that funny how that happens? How they turn on you so quick?
Did they ever? I don't recall a time when Michigan wasn't being dogged by the media, especially Paul Feinbaum and these clowns that are that get paid a lot of money, but they don't actually know what they're talking about. They've been on Michigan the whole time, and especially Jim Harbaugh about how he can't win the big game, about he can't beat SEC, he can't win a playoff game. Well, before that, Paul, you were saying that you can't beat Ohio State. Well, they beat Ohio State. They proved you wrong in 21. They proved you wrong in 22. And then, oh, by the way, they proved you wrong 3 times and went in 23, and then go off to actually beat your favorite Alabama and then win the national title. I mean, yeah, I think the narratives. I think we got like 1 week of positive coverage, and then and now it's back to Georgia's the best, and Michigan is who cares about them? Oh the Natty. Oh yeah, that was a whole like month and a half ago. So moving on.
Yeah, they like to move it on, but John. Hopefully, Michigan, y'all enjoy it. Y'all earned it. And like I sent you that message that night, I told you to enjoy it because you don't know when you'll get another one. Who knows if Michigan – hopefully, for your sake, they win another one. But we just don't know in this lifetime. But what we do know, John, is there's always those special players on those teams.
Yep.
And Michigan has a lot of them. So these awards could go to anybody. But who is the offensive and defensive MVPs for Michigan this year? A lot of names, a lot of choices.
It is tough because you could give it to 90 almost all the starters essentially. But I'm going to start with one player in particular. His name is Jonathan James McCarthy, and he is a very special player and a quarterback that, not just with what he did on the field, but the intangibles, the leadership, winning the press conference just as much as he's winning his games. JJ was the quintessential Michigan quarterback. And in my opinion, maybe the best Michigan quarterback that we've ever had. Because Tom Brady, he really had his success in the NFL. And, you basically have to go back to a guy named Tom Harmon from the 1940s to have and that was basically like a different sport back then. That's who continued to come up as like the counter argument. And I'm like, okay, if you have to bring up somebody from the 1940s, I think we can safely say that that's, basically a different sport. And we're not going to factor that in. But I mean, look at what he was able to accomplish. And I don't think any other quarterback that we've had, Cade, Shea Patterson, under the Jim Harbaugh era, could have won that game against Alabama. And so for that alone, and the fact that he has that clutch ability, I thought he would when I pushed for him so hard to get the start over Cade, because it's like we all saw with our own eyes that JJ was better. We all saw it. And it took the staff a while to make the switch, but I think they finally, they did that audition, Cade versus JJ, and then obviously JJ won the job, and he went 27-1, I believe, in his career. One loss in his entire career as starter against TCU. That's it. That's pretty remarkable. Not a lot of quarterbacks can say that ever. So I think you got to give it to him, but not just him. I also think you need to give Blake Corum a significant offense MVP as well. Blake Corum is somebody who is automatic. If you need 2 yards, he's giving you 3, maybe more. The cuts that he makes, the routes, when he's receiving even, what he's able to do in the biggest moments on the biggest stages to just propel Michigan, I think was remarkable. And so with that said, I think he had a tremendous season and decided, of course, to go to the NFL. And so I obviously we wish him the best, but I think he had this past year, he had 1,245 yards, 27 touchdowns. He broke the single season touchdown record. For those reasons, JJ McCarthy and Blake Corum are the 2 offense MVPs in my mind. And then on defense, you could give it to the whole defense, and have a reasonable case. But if I'm forced to pick a few players, Mike Sanderstill is somebody who I think that was one of the greatest coaching decisions Jim Harbaugh ever made, to move him from receiver to nickelback, because at nickelback, he has been extremely remarkable. He was good for almost an interception a game, it felt like. He was always making interceptions. He was making plays. He was breaking up footballs. He was running all over that field and stopping, the plays from being made. You can't ask for a better nickelback in that situation. Will Johnson, I mean, come on. He could be in the NFL right now if he wanted to be. He is so good. The only player that he was really able to hang with him was Marvin Harrison Jr. That battle between those two was so fun to watch. And they both got some hits in, right? Like Will Johnson got that interception off of Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvin Harrison Jr. outran Will Johnson on multiple occasions. They both got some hits in. It was a heavyweight matchup, those two going at it. And it was fun to watch just as a football fan. And I knew that both of them are headed high in the NFL. So Will Johnson, Mike Sanders still. You could also make a case for Chris Jenkins. You can make a case for what he was able to do on defense up front. You could make a case for Junior Colson and Michael Barrett, Ernest Hausman. But if I stick to two, I'm going to give it to Mikey Sanders still and Will Johnson.
Yeah, those are some great selections, Johns. No arguments here. The only one I would throw in for maybe the offense would maybe you could throw one of the receivers in there, like Roman Wilson. The incredible play he made against Alabama. A lot of people said that saved Michigan's season. But I agree with all those picks, and it's kind of funny, John, if you think about it. Well, not funny, but it's kind of true what Michigan stands for. Is Blake Corum was told to go to the NFL draft by Harbaugh, but he didn't want to. He wanted to come back and win a natty because Harbaugh said, go to the NFL. You're ready. But he didn't want to. That's what I found pretty poetic. It's like he came back and it paid off, and I'm happy it did for him.
Absolutely.
And now, John, there's always things that we learn. We learn as humans. Everybody learns. If you stop learning, then you know it all. And at that point, we'd probably all be gone and passed away. But there's one thing you can never stop learning, and that's about your team. John, what were the key takeaways that you learned about Michigan this year? Or maybe something that you confirmed and already knew, whatever you want it to be, the good, bad, the ugly. What are 3 key takeaways from this season that you learned about your Michigan Wolverines?
That they had the clutch gene to be able to take it all the way. I did predict that Michigan would go undefeated in the regular season and win the Big Ten. I thought they'd make it to the Natty, but I wasn't sure if they'd. I thought it would be Georgia versus Michigan, and I wasn't sure who would win that matchup, to be honest. But they had the ability to take it all the way, to hit that next gear. I think that was huge. I think that also we all learned a lot about the Michigan culture and about how good Jim Harbaugh actually was. Because Austin, I think that the hallmark of like an excellent coach or like a great coach, he coaches the games and they win the games, and that's a great coach, and everybody does what they're supposed to do and they do it at a high level. That's a great coach. But the hallmark of an elite coach is when you can take 6 games off from coaching during the game and the team still wins. The team literally shakes off whatever the outside noise is and goes through and wins the games. The amount of roadblocks and pitfalls and stumbling blocks that were put in Michigan's way, I think it makes it just that much more monumental, this title win. Because almost any other team, given the exact same set of circumstances, almost any other team doesn't go undefeated. I would say the only teams that even stand a chance of going undefeated otherwise would be like Georgia and maybe Alabama, or maybe Alabama in Saban's prime, or maybe like a 2019 LSU type, just crazy talent. But it's very few teams that could have not just gone undefeated, but gone undefeated with the set of circumstances and pitfalls and roadblocks that were in their way. And they just bashed every one of them down to go undefeated. It was remarkable. It really was.
And I agree, John. And that's the thing that I want to emphasize, and this is coming from a non-Wolverines fan, and it's not just John rattling, oh, Michigan's the greatest, yada, yada, yada. just want to point out, that's very true. There's very few teams that could have done what Michigan did. It seemed like every pit stop, everything that was in their way, they overcame it, and they bet on themselves, and it worked. And it just seemed like maybe it was a thing of destiny. A lot of people don't like that word. It makes them think you didn't earn it. Maybe this was a season of destiny for Michigan. And maybe that this was all meant to happen to get to where they got to. But, John, there's one way that Coach Harbaugh always ends every game after a great victory. And I can't think of a better way to end a great conversation with a great friend and a great team. John, you probably know this quote very well, but who's got it better than us?
Well, before I answer that, I just want to make it to let everybody know to catch Voice of College Football every Monday night. I do a show called the Big Ten Live Ocho Edition, aka the Ocho, and we bring on a guest from all these different teams. In the Big Ten, we're covering all 18 Big Ten teams, bring on a media guest every week. So Mondays at 8 p.m. Eastern. And then usually I'm out on business this time, but normally Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern is Michigan Wolverines Live on the Michigan channel at the Voice of College Football. So essentially, if you want to catch me, it's 8 p.m. Mondays and Tuesdays. That's it. So you can catch me on those. And then who's got it better than us? Nobody.
Nobody. But, John, I appreciate you coming on. And once again, here's where you can find John on Twitter, Instagram, Threads. Especially if you're an Ohio State fan, I'm sure he welcomes a conversation. I'm sure he might even invite you on the Michigan Live to talk about it.
Oh man, we've had times when we've had more Ohio State fans on that panel than Michigan fans. I mean, I welcome whoever in the Big Ten wants to be part of the panel and be part of the conversation, whether you're Ohio State, Minnesota, whatever. You're welcome and you can come in.
Yeah, and go check it out. Tuesdays at 8 p.m. The Ocho, also on Mondays at 8 p.m. John does a great job hosting that. Let's get some likes, some comments, subscribes for that as well. And let's make sure it keeps going. We don't want that to go away. And we want to keep hearing John's beautiful voice talk about Michigan, because I need Michigan news, and John's the only one that can deliver it to me. But, John, I appreciate you taking the time to talk Michigan football with me. I'm sure you enjoy doing that on a daily basis, because Michigan, in your eyes, is the best team that ever existed. But I appreciate you for being here, John. And for all my audiences, please make sure you like, comment, subscribe. I will be back with more. This is just the start, and we're going to keep it going. Thank you again, John, for taking time to be here. And don't forget to hit the like, comment, subscribe button. But I'm out, and we'll see you all next time. Go Cards, everybody.
Go Blue.